welcome to the Crochet Magical Mystery Tour. My name is Chris of Light and Joy Designs, and in this crochet along, this is a year-long crochet along where each week I present you with a free pattern. There's also monthly giveaways, yarn reviews, and more. All the links to join the Magical Mystery Tour Cowl crochet along are in the description below. Today I will be teaching you how to make this beautiful wavy Tunisian knit cowl, and we will be using Red Heart Soft Essential Stripes in the colorway Linen Stripes. I've adjusted the lighting here so that you can see the cowl a little better. Before we get started, I just wanted to say all the links are in the description below. If you like having these free tutorials, please let me know by giving me a thumbs up, giving this video a thumbs up, and please go ahead and subscribe because every week I have new free video tutorials of new crochet and Tunisian crochet patterns. So let's get started. The way that this pattern is worked is in a series of increases and decreases that create these ripples that travel vertically. Now, you can certainly make this as a scarf and make it up like this. We work this pattern flat from the bottom up, and then we sew it together into a tube. But you could work it all the way vertically and then sew it together that way. And be sure to stay tuned towards the end of this video where I will have a lot of pictures of this cowl, plus possibly some other pictures of other ways to do this. For this pattern, I'm going to be using Red Heart Soft Essentials in the colorway Linen Stripe. You're going to need a measuring tape, a scissors, a yarn needle, and a Tunisian crochet hook in size 8. I'm using the Denise interchangeable crochet hooks, and I'll have a link to those below. I highly recommend this set. You can change out these endings and make them longer or shorter, and they have a full set of all different sizes. This is an 8.0 millimeter. For this pattern, we have a few different sections. We have the beginning and ending section, which is a ribbed section. That's at the beginning and the end, and that's 4 rows each. Then we have section A, and we have section C, and in between section A and section B always comes a section B. So it's worked essentially in these section A and section C are 4 rows and section B is 1. So your sections are essentially worked in 5-row sections. And I'm going to go through each of these sections line by line and show you how to do them. You are going to have the option of working however many of these 2 sections as you like. You can work them each just once. You can work 1, 2, and then 3, or you could work 1, 2, 3, 4. It's up to you. You just keep working these back and forth until you have the height that you want, and then you finish with a ribbed section. So I'm going to show you here my swatch. I recommend that you do a swatch so that you get your sizing correct. If you want to just go based on the stitches that I'm using, you can do that as well. My swatch is, I did a swatch of before I start that, this pattern is done in multiples of 8 plus 2 stitches. So my swatch, I did 16 stitches plus 2. I did a total of 18. And I just wanted to measure the repeat portion of the pattern, which is 8. The repeat portion of the pattern is 8 stitches. And for my swatch, the 16 stitches from here to here was 5 inches. So I know that for every 16 stitches I have 5 inches, which means that for every pattern repeat of 8 stitches I have 2.5 inches. For my cowl, I can choose a few different sizes. Let's say, so I'm going to look at sizes in these measurements of inches. So if I want a cowl that's, say, 25 inches, that's going to be 5 inches, 5 inches times 5 equals 25 inches. That means I take the 5 and I multiply it by the 16 stitches, and that means I would need to do 80 stitches plus 2 to get a 25-inch cowl. If I want it to be bigger, then I could add another 8 stitches. Adding another 8 stitches is going to add 2.5 inches. That would give me a 27.5-inch cowl. Now this is the measurement that's going to be the diameter. We're going to be working this piece flat, and then we're going to be sewing the sides together to form a tube. And if I want a 30-inch cowl, that would be 96 stitches. So I would highly recommend that you do a swatch to figure out how wide your piece is and how tall it is. Now for my swatch, the number of rows, my swatch has 18 rows and it's 16 inches tall. That means that if I divide both of those in half, that means 9 rows is 3 inches. And if I add both of these together, that means 27 rows would give me 9 inches. This is just for getting my gauge. So when I'm trying to figure out how many repeats I want to do, I know that my top and my bottom is going to be 8 rows. That's sort of a given. And I know that for each section that I do is going to be 5 rows. So if I do 3, I guess I should actually call this sections. If I do 3 sections, then I'm going to have 15 rows worth of sections, because each of these sections is 5. 5 times 3 is 15. Plus my 8 rows for the ribbing, I would have a total of 23 rows. So how tall, we're getting now the measurement, this measurement here. Before we were getting this measurement, the circumference, okay, or this measurement here. But now we want to know how tall is it going to be. So we take the 23 rows and we're going to divide it by one of our gauge pieces here, and I'm just going to divide it by the smallest one, the 9. Divide it by the 9 rows. So 23 divided by 9 equals 2.55555. And when I multiply that by, since I'm using this measurement here, I'm going to multiply it by 3 inches. So 2.55 times 3 inches is going to be 7.66 inches high. That's a pretty good size height, kind of perfect for a cowl. But let's say I want it to be just a little bit taller. How tall will it be if I do 4 repeats? Well, then I'm going to have 20 rows worth of repeats plus 8 rows of the ribbing. That means I'm going to have 28 rows altogether. And I already know up here that 27 rows is going to give me approximately 9 inches. So I can know that if I do 4 repeats, my cowl is going to be about 9 inches tall. So I'm going to actually start, I'm going to do the 25-inch cowl. So I'm going to start with a chain of 80 plus 2. So I'm going to do 82 chains to start. Now you can, after you can either do the swatch and get your own measurements, or you can use what I've used and you know, check your gauge. You know, do a swatch, see if it matches my gauge that I've told you about. And then you can choose any of these different sizes, 80 stitches, 88, 96, or even smaller or larger. I will say though that Tunisian Crochet has, especially even with the knit stitch, it has a tendency to not be very stretchy in this direction. So, and that's because of the return pass limits how stretchy it can be in this direction. It's always a little bit more stretchy in this direction. And this way is going to be the part that goes around your neck. So you really want to make sure it's not too tight, is my point, because it can have a tendency to be a little, it can kind of tighten up as you're going, especially if you're kind of new, if you're doing your return passes really tight and so on. So my recommendation is to go for, you know, at least 25-inch or maybe even a little bit bigger. But of course it's completely up to you. Swatching is the way to avoid having surprises that you don't want later on. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start with a slip stitch. I'm going to take the yarn, place it over your finger, pull it up over across to the left, grab the thread on the right, pull it over the thread on the left, pull up the thread on the left, and then just put that on your hook. And then you're going to pull on the working yarn and tighten it up. Tighten that knot, tighten up that loop, and we're just going to, you're going to chain the amount that you're starting with. If you're following along with me, I'm going to chain 82 stitches. To do a chain, we're going to yarn over, pull through the loop on the hook, yarn over, pull through the loop on the hook, and you're just going to continue that until you have 82 stitches. And again, in case you missed it, I'm using an 8mm hook and Red Heart Soft Essentials, which is a 5-weight yarn. It's kind of a lighter 5-weight yarn. And as you're working your chains, don't work them too tight. Okay, so I have my 80 stitches, and I just wanted to point out to you that this is going to seem rather big. You're going to say, oh gosh, this is that doesn't seem right. And it is right, and the reason is because this pattern is a ripple pattern that works vertically. So if you've ever worked with ripple patterns, you know that it kind of scrunches up your fabric. So it is the right length. You can trust it. So especially if you've done a swatch, you'll see, because when you measure your swatch, you can see how it goes like this. So when you measure, you're measuring, don't measure your edge stitch. You're measuring from one indentation to one bump, or from this indentation to this bump. And again, I'm not measuring my edge stitches. My swatch is 5 stitches across for 16 stitches. Okay, so to begin, if we look at the front of our chain, we have these V's, and in the back we have what's called the back bumps. We're going to be working into the second chain into the back bump right here. So we're going to go into that back bump, pull this loop so that it's snug on the hook, yarn over, and pull up a loop. I'm going to put my extender on now. And you're just going to do that in every back bump across. The thing to make sure, especially if if you're newer to Tunisian, is you just want to make sure that all of your loops are uniform. You don't want them to be too tight, as it will make your fabric curl quite a lot. Your fabric will curl a little bit, especially in knit stitch, and that's okay, because once we have the tube, once we sew the two ends together, the curling will sort of not be a problem. So do this all the way to the end. At the end, you will have a total of 80 loops, in my case, 82 loops on your hook. In Tunisian crochet, we have 2 passes for every row. We have the forward pass, which is what we're doing right now. That's where we build up loops on our hook. And then we have the reverse pass, where we close off those loops or remove them from our hook. And that's called the reverse pass or the return pass. And so when you're working in Tunisian crochet, you are always looking at the right side of your fabric, unless you're doing some kind of color work like the Tunisian brioche series that I have. And you can check that out. That's also in the Magical Mystery Tour. It's a 4-part series. All right, so I'll meet you at the end. Okay, so here I am at the end, and I have my 82 stitches, and you can see by working into the back bumps, we're creating this really pretty bottom edge to our work. So now we're ready for the return pass. And the way that we do that is there's 2 steps. The first step is you yarn over and you pull through 1 loop on the hook. That closes off that first, or actually this is called the edge stitch, the end or edge stitch. And then we yarn over and we pull through 2 loops. 1, 2. And that removes the second stitch. And then we just continue to do that all the way back, doing yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, all the way back to the end until you have just 1 loop left on your hook. And as we're going back, this reverse pass, you can see that we are actually creating a chain underneath all of our vertical loops. So just go ahead and do this all the way until you have just one loop left on your hook. As you're doing your return pass, be sure to make your stitches uniform, just like on the forward pass. Make sure that this chain that you're creating on the return pass is not too tight. You want them to all be the same size and not too tight. Just feed up the loops as you go along. If your return pass is super tight, what will end up happening is that's what causes your garment to not have too much stretch in this direction. So be sure to, in all of your stitches, not do them too tight. You know, you don't want to do them overly loose. You just kind of really want that Goldilocks amount, and that they're all the same. And here I am at the end. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. I have one loop on my hook left, so that means I know I'm done. So I have just created the first foundation row. And you can see we have the front vertical bar. In the back you can see the back vertical bar. That was our loop that we had on our hook. And then this is the chain that runs through those vertical bars. We have the V's in the front, the upper horizontal bar, the lower horizontal bar, and in the back, just like in our starting chain, we have these back bumps, or sometimes it's called the top bump or the top hump. They call it different names. But so now we're ready to begin our first row of the rib section. So for our ribbing section, the way that we're going to work it is we're going to do 3 knit stitches, 1 purl, 3 knit stitches, 1 purl. And our first and last stitch will just be regular. So in Tunisian crochet, this loop on your hook is your first stitch. So we don't have to think or do anything different about that. So our first 3 stitches are going to be knit stitches. And to do a knit stitch, we're going to go in between the front vertical bar and the back vertical bar. We're going to go right into that space and come out through the back. This is the back vertical bar. Then we're going to yarn over and we're going to pull up a loop. And we want to make sure, especially with the knit stitch, that the loop on our hook is the same height as our starting loop, and that all the stitches are uniform. So let's do that again. So here's our front vertical bar, and here is our back vertical bar. We want to go in between those two all the way through to the back. We're going to yarn over and pull up a loop. So your tension on your hand doesn't have to really be that strong. So that's 1, 2 knit stitches. Now we're going to do one more. Go in between those vertical bars, the front and the back, yarn over and pull up a loop. Now we're going to do a purl stitch. So for a purl stitch, we pull our yarn to the front, and then we go under the front vertical bar. We're going to move the yarn over. We're going to yarn over, and it's easiest to pull this through if you don't pull too tight on everything. And then you pull up a loop. So I'll show that to you again. let's just undo that one and we'll do it all over again. So here's our front vertical bar. We're going to pull our yarn to the front, go under that front vertical bar. We're going to wrap the yarn around our hook and pull up that loop. And you can see it creates this little I don't know what you would even call that. It's basically like a purl stitch. If you've done any knitting, it looks just like a purl stitch. So now we're going to do 3 more knit stitches. Go in between those vertical bars, pull up a loop. That's 1, 2, 3. And now we're going to do another purl stitch. So I'm going to pull that yarn to the front, go under the vertical bar. I'm going to wrap the yarn around my hook, and I'm not going to hold the tension on this really tight because that makes it easier to pull it through the loop. So just keep repeating that all the way to the end, and I will meet you at the end for how to do the last edge stitch. So it's just 3 knit, 1 purl, 3 knit, 1 purl, all the way to the end. If you lose your count along the way, if you're like, how many knit stitches have I done? You can always go back and look at your stitches. The purl stitch will have this little bump on it, and it'll kind of be separated a little bit from the others. Here you can see the other one. And that's how you can spot it. So I've just done 3 knit stitches. I'm going to do my last purl stitch in this second to last stitch. And you can see this is how it kind of all bunches up. And now we're ready to do the edge stitch. Now, if you've done Tunisian crochet before, you know how to do this, but I'm just going to show you in case you have never done it before. The edge stitch we've got this right here is the first chain of our return pass, and these 3 threads, 1, 2, and 3, make up the edge stitch. And to complete the edge stitch, what we do is we're going to go on top of the inner thread and under these outer 2 threads, 1, 2. So I'm going to go on top of this one here and under these 2 here. And then I'm going to yarn over and pull up that last loop. That's my edge stitch. And we'll be looking at that again. So to do our return pass, it's the same as the first time. We yarn over, and when you do that first yarn over, you want to make sure that you're keeping this loop the same height as all the other loops. I like to make sure that as I'm making the loop to pull it through, that it's the same height as this loop here, that I'm not squinching it down, because otherwise this edge will be really tight and your other side will be longer, and it won't be nice and even. So just make sure that as you're making this first loop, as you pull it through, that it's the same height. So yarn over, pull through 1, and then I like to hold that edge stitch to hold it in place to keep things from stretching out. Yarn over, pull through 2. And I kind of do that all the way down. I just kind of grab the stitch that was just made and then yarn over, pull through 2. I just keep moving up my left hand as I go, and then push the yarn down a little bit. You're just continuing to do yarn over, pull through 2 all the way back. And in this pattern, we always use just a normal return pass, so the return pass is always nice and easy. Don't have to think too much. It kind of flows kind of fast, but you know, don't go fast until you've got it consistent. And you will notice that as you're coming back, you'll see those 3 knit stitches, and then you'll know you're at a purl stitch because there'll be like a little space in between. That's normal when you're working these different types of stitches together. Sometimes you'll have what looks like a space, but it won't show up as a space later on. So just work this all the way back to the end until you have just 1 loop on your hook. So we have 2 rows completed now. We have this first row, and then we have our second row that has all these openings. Your latest row will always have these big openings in it. Those end up getting closed up in the end when we do our bind off. So now the next thing that we're going to do is work 3 more of those rows. So you're just going to continue in the same pattern, knit 3, just going to go in between the front and vertical bar all the way through to the back, yarn over, pull up a loop, we knit 3, and then we purl, we bring the yarn to the front, go under that front vertical bar, yarn over and pull up the loop. So just work in that pattern all the way to the end, and you're going to do that for, this is 1, 2, 3 more rows. So we're going to have a total of 4 rows in this pattern, and I'll meet you when you have those 4 rows. I may pop back in to show you the end stitch again. Something to keep in mind as you are doing this is to, especially as you're doing these knit stitches, is to really bring up that loop, because there can be a tendency for that loop to not come all the way up, and then your work's going to get really tight. So each time you do a knit stitch, make sure that you're really lifting it up. That's my purl stitch. Really make sure that you're lifting it up to the same height as all the other stitches. And it may feel a little bit like you're making them a little loose, but that's okay, because it's better if they're just a little bit loose than too tight. And again, this is another reason why doing a swatch is a great idea, because you kind of get to practice the pattern for a few rows before you go ahead and get committed to the full project. And also you can see if you like the yarn in that pattern and so on. And you can always take that swatch out. That's usually what I do, is I'll undo the swatch to save the yarn. So I'll meet you at the end. So I just did my last purl stitch, and now I'm at the end, and I want to show you how to find that edge stitch. Remember, it's got 3 threads here on the end. Just sometimes it kind of, it's like sliding over to the side, so just stand it up nice and tall, like you would say to your kids, stand up tall. It's got those 3 threads, so it's got this one here, the inner thread, and then it's got these 2 outer threads, and the one in the front crosses over the one in the back. So again, I'm going to go on top of the inner thread and under the 2 outer threads. Yarn over and pull up a loop. That's my edge stitch. And again, for the return pass, yarn over, pull through 1, keeping everything nice and uniform, yarn over, pull through 2, and just yarn over, pull through 2 loops all the way back. So this is our second row, and you're going to do 2 more exactly like this. And I'll meet you when we're going to start section A. I just finished my second row of the knit ribbing, and I want to show you something kind of cool. On the side of your project, you'll be able to tell what row you're on by counting the edge stitches. So you can see here we have 1, 2, 3 edge stitches. This was the foundation row, and these are my 2 rows of ribbing so far. So if you lose track and you're not sure if how many rows you've done, because in Tunisian crochet sometimes it's hard to tell from the front, you can always tell very easily from the side. So your first V here is going to be your foundation row in this pattern, and then this is 1, 2 rows of ribbing. So I'm going to do 2 more rows of the rib stitch. Okay, so my 4 rows of the ribbing are completed, and it'll look something like this. Again, we can check on the side. This first V is our foundation row, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4 V's on the side. Those are my 4 ribbed rows. So now we're ready to start section A. And let's just take a look at the first row, row 1. So this is an 8-stitch repeat, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing 2 knit stitches, then we're going to make a stitch using something called a full stitch, then 4 knit stitches, and then we're going to knit 2 stitches together. And that portion we will repeat all the way to the end, and then at the very end we'll just do our regular edge stitch. So let's take a look at that. So we're going to start with 2 knit stitches. 1, 2, and then we are going to do, this dot here represents make 1, and you can do a make 1 stitch a few different ways in Tunisian, but the way that we're going to do it in this pattern is we're going to make a full stitch. Now a full stitch goes in between 2 of your sets of vertical bars. So unlike the knit stitch where we go in between the front vertical bar and the back vertical bar, we're going between the whole stitches. So we're going to go right in between this stitch here and the next stitch, all the way front to back, yarn over and pull up a loop. And that's 1 increase. Now we're going to do 4 knit stitches. So right into that next stitch, we're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we're going to knit 2 together. And to knit 2 together, you go into the first one, go under that first vertical bar, and then go through the next stitch through the front and back vertical bar all the way to the back. Then we're going to yarn over, pull the loop through that first stitch, pull it through the second stitch, and now we've knit those 2 together. And that is the end of our repeat. You can count it: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stitches. Now if you want to, if it makes it easier for you, you can use You can use stitch markers, either the knitting kind or the kind that you clip in. I find that I don't need them, so I don't use them. Because I can usually recognize where I'm at by looking at the stitches. So we're going to start over again. 2 knit. That's 1, 2. Now we're going to make one using the full stitch. So this was the last stitch and this is the next stitch, so I'm going to go in between those two, yarn over and pull up a stitch. That's a full stitch. I'm going to go into the next one and knit. I'm going to do 4 of those. 2, 3, 4, and now I'm going to knit 2 together. I'm going to go into 1 and go into the second one, go all the way to the back, yarn over and pull up a loop. And that's another 8 stitches complete, and you can check it. So we got 2, 4, 6, 8, 2, 4, 6, 8. And actually when you're just beginning, if you want to keep checking along the way, that can help you from having a mess up. And these 2 stitches that we're putting together, you can see the first one is in the front and the second one behind here. So you just want to make sure you're not going to go into that one again, because that one has kind of been made to disappear. So now we're going to do 2 knit stitches, and we're going to want our stitches to you know, as always, be uniform and, you know, not you know, too spread out. They will be a little bit spread out, and that will get a little bit corrected when we do our return pass. So 2 knit stitches. Now we do a full stitch right in between those 2 stitches, and then 4 knit stitches. 2, 3, 4, and then 2 together. And you'll notice that your 2 together is always being done on a knit and a purl stitch from the previous row. Okay, so just do that all the way to the end, and then you should have just your edge stitch left. I'll meet you there. Okay, let's say you are going along and you get a phone call, and then you come back to your work and you're like, ugh, where am I? I'm going to show you how to determine that. So let's take a look at how these stitches look. We can see there's a space right here. That's usually going to happen where you had your last 2 together. And if we look at it closely, we can see that this thread goes under both this vertical bar and this one as well. Okay, so we know that that one's a 2 together. So then we can check, yeah, this is a knit one, this is a knit one, and then see this one looks a little different. You see how each of these is coming up through a V, and then this one is in between 2 V's. That's our make one. So then we have 1, 2, 3, 4 knits. So now we know we're ready to do another 2 together, and we've got from the previous row, we've got a knit and a purl, so we know we're on the right track. And like I said before, if you prefer to use a stitch marker, then go ahead and do that. So I'm at my last 2 stitches that are going to do knit together, knit those 2 together, and then on the edge stitch, just do it the way you do all the other edge stitches. Go over this 3rd inside thread and under under the 2 outside threads, yarn over and pull up a loop. And then the return pass is the same. We're going to yarn over and pull through 1 loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops all the way to the end. And as you get to places where you had 2 together, let me show you here as we get closer. if there's like a gap, just make sure that you keep your stitches. You're essentially making a chain as you're doing your return pass. Just make sure that each chain is uniform, that it's the same size as you're going along, and then everything will look the way it's supposed to look. So there was a 2 together there. Just want to make sure that your stitch doesn't become overly elongated, and places where like this one was well, where the stitches are maybe more bunched up, still make sure that your chains are the same length. And you can just keep feeding your loops up as you go. So I'll meet you back at the beginning for row 2 of section A. Okay, so I just finished my return pass for row 1. We're ready to go on to row 2 of section A, and where row 1 was knit, knit, make 1, and then 4 knits, that make 1 is going to move over 1 now. So now it's going to be knit 3, make 1, knit 3, 2 together. And you're going to see that how this pattern develops like this. Okay, so but let's just stay focused on row 2. So we're just going to knit 3, so 1, 2, 3. Now we make 1 in between these 2 stitches. It's our full stitch. And then knit 3. 1, 2, 3. And then knit 2 together. And you should always have 8 stitches after a repeat. So 2, 4, 6, 8. And remember our edge stitch, we don't count in the repeat. So knit 3, that's 1, 2, 3. We're going to make a stitch here by doing a full stitch, and then knit 3. 1, 2, 3, and then knit 2 together. So we go into 1, and we go into the second one, all the way to the back, yarn over and pull up that loop. And now we should have 16, 2, 4, 6, 8, 2, 4, 6, 8. Perfect. So just do that all the way to the end, and I'll meet you at the end. All right, so I'm at the end here of the forward pass of row 2. I've done my 2 together, and now I'm at this edge stitch going on top of this inside thread and under these outside threads. And you'll notice that the work is starting to slant, and that is normal for this pattern. So we just do our regular normal return pass, yarn over, pull through 1 loop, yarn over, pull through 2, all the way back. And because of this pattern, because of the doing these 2 together on this edge is going to continue to grow at a slant as it gets taller. So I'll meet you back at the beginning for row 3 of section A. Okay, we're ready for row 3. And row 3 is similar in that we're always going to have these 6 knit stitches, but our make 1 continues to move over 1. So this time it's knit 4, make 1, knit 2. So let's take a look at that, and then of course the knit 2 together. So by now you're probably finding this a little bit easier, hopefully. And let's say you stop your work and you come back and you haven't made a note on your pattern. You're like, what row am I on? Again, you can count from the bottom. Row 1, this first V is our foundation row. Then 1, 2, 3, 4 is our ribbed row, and then we have 1, 2 of the section A. So we're on row 3. So we're going to knit 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we're going to make 1 with a full stitch, and then knit 2, 1, 2, and then knit 2 together. So we go into both of those, go all the way to the back, yarn over, and pull up a loop. And just repeat that across. Now you'll notice that when you knit 2 together, there's kind of a jump to the next stitch. Just try and pull that so it's not too far apart while keeping the size of that the same as all the other loops. So that's 2, 3, and 4. And as we get to the places where this fourth one, that was a make one from the last row, so the stitches get a little bit tight in here. So just really, if you need to kind of open it up to see where you're at. Now we're going to do our make one here, and then 3 more knits, 1, 2, 3, and then knit 2 together. And just do that all the way to the end. You can see our pattern is kind of starting to emerge. I'll meet you, actually just go all the way to the end, do your edge stitch, and then do your normal return pass, and I'll meet you back at the beginning for row 4 of section A. Okay, so now we are ready for row 4 of section A, and that's going to be, the repeat for that is 5 knits, make 1 with a full stitch, and then knit 1, knit 2 together. And actually, so you're going to do that all the way across, and then the following row is going to be all just knit across, knit stitch. So just like the other rows, we're going to knit 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to make 1 with a full stitch, and then we're going to knit 1, and then we're going to knit 2 together, and then we'll just repeat that. Knit 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Make 1. Make sure you're getting in between the 2 stitches. Make sure you don't miss that very next stitch. Then knit 1, and then knit 2 together. So do that all the way to the end, and then we will do our section B row, which is just 1 row of all knit across. Okay, now we're ready to begin section B, which is very easy. We just knit in every stitch across. I'll just show you the first set of stitches in case there's anything here that sticks out. Just make sure that your stitches are always uniform in height, that you're pulling them up high enough. You will notice that the places where we have made a stitch, this is the line where we've been making stitches, it gets a little bit crowded. So just be sure not to miss a stitch. Just other than that, just go all the way across in knit stitch. and then just do a regular normal return pass. And I'll meet you back where we will start section C. Okay, so we have done our rib section, our section A, section B, and we're ready to start section C. So row 1 of section C is going to be knit 2 together, is going to be the start of our series. Then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 knits, make 1 with a full stitch, knit 1. We repeat that over and over and over and over to the end, and then we do our edge stitch. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so let's take a look at row 1, section A. We're going to start out with knit 2 together. So this is our first vertical bar that we don't go into, that we never go into. So we're going to go into the second one and the third one, go all the way through, yarn over and pull up a loop, and those two have been knit together. Now we do 5 knit, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we're going to make 1 with a full stitch, and then knit 1, and that's our full sequence. So we should have 8 stitches here, not counting our starting stitch. 2, 4, 6, 8. Perfect. So you're just going to continue that sequence all along. Knit 2 together, knit 5, make 1 with a full stitch, and then knit 1, and then repeat. And then you'll just work a normal return pass. I'll meet you back here for row 2 of section C. Just wanted to mention that if you get to the end of a row and you're out of sequence, you can go back and try and undo your stitches until you find your mistake. And if you're not able to, sometimes you might want to just go all the way back to the end of the row and start over again if you're new and if you can't recognize you know where you missed your stitch. So just wanted to put that out there, that not all is not lost. If you get to the end and your sequence isn't matching up with the pattern, you can always just start that row over again and just do it really carefully. So I'm on my return pass, and I just wanted to mention that as you're doing your return pass, you're going to probably notice that your stitches are going to feel kind of bunched up, and that's normal, and that's because of this pattern, how we're decreasing stitches and increasing stitches. So some of them are going to feel really bunched up where we've made a lot of stitches, and then in other places they're going to feel a little further apart. So just try and make sure that you're on your return pass, that your stitches, these chains that you're making essentially on the return pass, that they are uniform, that they're the same size, no matter if you have bunched up stitches, or like here we have one that they're kind of far apart. Want to make sure that that stitch is the same size as all the other ones, and that will give you the nicest looking, most consistent looking fabric. Okay, so we're ready to begin row 2. So row 2 is similar to row 1 in that all the rows in section C begin with a knit 2 together, but our make 1 is going to travel backwards. So in this, and we always have the same number of knits, it's just that they're on either side of this make one, this full stitch. But the knits on either side of the full stitch will always add up to 6. So in this case, we're going to have 4 knits, 1, 2, 3, 4, make one via a full stitch, and then knit 2. And that's going to be our repeat. So let's take a look at that. And you can see our pattern starting to emerge. It's really pretty. I didn't mention this in the beginning, but I will say that when you pick your yarn for this project, it's good to pick a yarn that is going to show the stitch definition well. Something that's nice and a yarn that's smooth like this. And if you're going to use a striping yarn, use a long striping yarn. If you use a yarn that has a lot of variegation in the colors, it might be so busy that you will miss the stitch pattern. Solid colors would probably be great for this as well, especially colors that are either on the lighter or medium saturation color scheme. If really dark colors, you might not see the stitch definition as much. Okay, so to start this row, we're going to knit 2 together, go into 1, and then I go into the second one. This is the second. Let me just back up. We always skip the first vertical bar, so we're going to go under the second one and then into the third, all the way to the back, yarn over, pull up a loop. We've knit 2 together. Now we're going to knit 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and now we're going to make one. And you want to really open up that space so that you get it in the correct place. This is our next stitch, and this is the stitch we were just in. So we want to get in between the two, make our full stitch. We've increased 1, and now we knit 2. 1, 2. Make sure those loops get lifted up to the same height as all the others. And then we begin all over again with a knit 2 together, and so on. So I will meet you, and then of course you'll just work a normal return pass. And also when you get to your last stitch, you just work the edge stitch as we've been doing all along, and then work your return pass, and I'll meet you back here for row 3. I'm going to do another repeat here of row 2. I'm just going to describe to you what I'm experiencing so that if you experience it, you'll maybe that will help you. So as you're doing, one thing is as you're doing these knit stitches, you kind of really need to pull them up so that they don't become really small, so that the stitches in the middle of your work match the size of the stitches at the beginning of your work, because of the knitting 2 together and making 1, there can be a tendency, and as it gets heavier, there can be a tendency for the stitches to get tighter and tighter. So just keep an eye to that. So at the beginning of one of my repeats, I'm going to knit 2 together. And one thing that may happen to you as you're doing this is you might, you pull up that stitch and then you go, oh, where do I go in now? Where's my next stitch? And you say, oh, is it right there? And it's not. That was one of the ones that we knit those 2 together actually. But let's say you weren't sure. Take your last stitch out so that you can take a look at those stitches again. You can say, oh, okay, it's this one and this one are getting knitted together. And keep an eye on, as you're pulling this through, how it's coming through this stitch here. Oh, wait a second. Sorry. Let me do that over again. Going in here and into this one. It's coming through this stitch right here and then through this stitch here. So that's our knit two together. So we know we're not going back into this one. That one we just knitted into. So it's this next one that we're going into. And you can see even my stitches got a little bit, they got a little shortened here. So that makes them a little harder to see. But just stretch out your work if it's hard to see it. So now we're going to knit 4, 1, and I'm really going to lift up these stitches, 2, 3, and 4. Now, before I go into this fourth one, this fourth one is coming right before this one, which was a make one from the previous row. So they're kind of really tight together, okay, because this one has been squeezed in. So just bear that in mind, that when you go into this one, don't accidentally go into both of them at the same time. So you might have to just really open up that space. So we're on our fourth knit. We want to go in between the front and the vertical bars, yarn over, pull up that loop. Now it's time to make one. So we really have to kind of open up that space between the stitches, between the sets of vertical bars. That's our make one. Now we're going to go into this one. We're going to do 2 more knits, 1, really lifting up those stitches, and 2. And just kind of feed them down a little bit as you go. Let's just do one more series of that. Knit 2 together. Here's our next one. It's a little farther away. It's going to feel kind of far away because we just knitted these 2 together. Feels like you want to go into this one here that we already did. We're going to go in here. We're going to do 4 knit stitches. 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is where it gets a little tight because this was where we made one. So I'm just going to kind of open it up with my fingers so I can see those stitches. This is the make one from the previous row. I'm going to go in between those 2 sets of stitches and do a full stitch. And now I'm going to knit 2. 1, 2. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful if you're having any trouble with working as these stitches get a little tighter. So I'm at the end of row 2, and I just want to show you the edge stitch here. Just pull your work up so that you can see that in case it's kind of folded down. You're like, where did it go? It's right there. You can always recognize it because it has those 3 threads. The inner thread right here, right there, and the 2 outer threads where the front one crosses over the back one. And we go over this inner thread and under the 2 outer threads. And now we just do our return pass. Yarn over, pull through 1 loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops all the way back. And you will notice where we've been making stitches, the stitches are a little tighter. That's okay. Just make sure your return pass is uniform. And I'll meet you back at the beginning for starting row 3. So we're ready to begin row 3, and I want to point out to you that you can see that the pattern is now starting to go this way. Our fabric is starting to grow this way. So, and that's because of all the 2 togethers at the beginning of these rows. So we've done row 1, 2, and now we're ready for row 3. And you may be able to guess the pattern. We start with a 2 together, then we do 3 knit, make 1, 3 knit, and that's our repeat. So Start out again in the second and third stitches, knit those two together. Then we do 3 knits, 1, 2, and 3, and you'll notice that the make one is always right before the make one of the previous row, because you'll see how they're kind of getting bunched in there. So just open up that space to get in the right place in between this stitch and this make one stitch. That's where we're going to do our full stitch. So that's an increase, and then we do 3 more knits. 1, 2, and 3. And if you're watching your row below, you'll eventually kind of start to see if you're on the right track, because these 2 knit together are always happening where this line is developing over to the side like this. And then we do our 3 knits. 1, 2, 3. Our make one is always in this place where the stitches get bunched together. So we know we're on the right track. That's our make one or full stitch, and then 3 knit stitches, 2 and 3. So just do that all the way to the end, making sure to pull up your loops to the same height, and do your edge stitch. Don't forget to do that edge stitch at the end, and then do your return pass. I'll meet you back at the beginning again for row 4. So just finished row 3, and we can really see this pretty pattern developing. So now we're going to do row 4, and I bet you can probably guess how this is going to look. Our make one is going to move over 1, which means we're going to have 2 knits on the first side of it and 4 knits on the left side of it. So of course we start, we have our beginning stitch, which is just that first loop on our hook, and our edge stitch, and in between our pattern is going to be knit 2 together, knit 2, make 1 with a full stitch, and then knit 4. Just repeat that over and over again. And you probably noticed on the return pass how the how it definitely feels kind of bunched up as you're coming back. It's not as easy as a return pass on work where you're not making all these increases and decreases. So just keep just keep your stitches uniform at all times. Even if it feels a little uncomfortable, it'll be well worth it for the effect that we're going to get. All right, so we're going to begin row 4 of section C. We're going to go into the second and third stitch and yarn over and pull up a loop. We have knitted those 2 together. Now we're going to knit 2, so that's 1 and 2, and now we're going to make 1 with a full stitch in here, and you can tell we're in the right place because those our make 1 stitch is always right before the make 1 stitch of the previous row. That can help you with seeing where you are in the repeat if you lose track. So that was our make 1. Now we're going to knit 4. 1, 2, really lift up those loops. 3 and 4. And we have our 8 stitches, 2, 4, 6, 8. So just continue with that to the end. Don't forget to do your edge stitch at the end. The very last stitch will be your edge stitch, and then a normal return pass, and I'll meet you back here for what comes next. Okay, so row 4 is completed, and then what we do is at the end of every section we work a B section, which is just a knit all the way across, and that's what you're going to do next. After that, you would just repeat section A and section C, of course including section B in between each one anytime you do them, until you have the height that you want. Once you're at that point, join me back here for the last section, which will be a ribbing section, and then for the bind off. Okay, so I did 4 of these sections. I did A, C, and finished with, and had a section B in between each. I just finished with a section B, and now I'm ready to do the ribbing section. And for that section, it's basically going to be the same as what we did before. We're going to do 4 rows of knit 3, purl 1, knit 3, purl 1. That's the repeat. It's an 8-stitch repeat, just as we've been doing all along. So go ahead and do 4 rows of this rib section, and then I will meet you when you're done with that and show you how to do the bind off. In the meantime, let me give you a little peek of how it's looking so far. You can see it does curl a little bit, and you can either block that later, block that out, or sometimes when you sew this up, the curling will go away. So that's looking really cool. All right, I'll meet you back here for the bind off. I have finished my 4 rows of the 3x1 ribbing, and now it's time to do a bind off. If you're new to Tunisian crochet, on our last row we always have to do a bind off so that we tighten up these holes from the last row. So if you're using a Denise hook, you can just take the end off of it. You won't need that for doing the bind off. And to do the bind off, what we do is we're going to bind off in Tunisian simple stitch. So we start with the second vertical bar, and we're going to go under that front vertical bar. So not into it like we have been with the knit stitches. Just go right underneath it, yarn over, and pull up a loop. You have 2 loops on the hook. You're going to pull the one on the left through the one on the right, and that's one bind off. Go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and slip stitch. You're just going to do that all the way across to the end, and then I will show you how to sew this together. I'm at the second to last stitch here. Bind that off, and then I'm going to just go into my edge stitch just like I always do. Go on top of that inside thread and under the 2 outside threads, yarn over, pull up a loop, and slip stitch it. Now I'm just going to chain 1, and now we're going to be able to sew it together. So what you'll do is pull through an amount that's about 3 or 4 times the length of the side, because we're going to be sewing the side together. We want to make sure we don't run out of yarn. After you cut the yarn, pull that very long tail through, and then pull that chain tight, and that will bind it off. So one of the things you'll notice here on this piece, Tunisian crochet, we have this beautiful edge on our bottom. We have a nice edge along the side, and we've just created this really pretty edge along the top. This is one of the benefits of Tunisian crochet. We also have it over here on this side, these nice symmetric V's. So now what we're going to do is to sew this together. We're going to turn it with the right side in and the inside out. And we are going to fold it in half and line up the sides. So you can see the waves are going to match up on either end. And we're just going to do a mattress stitch. So you're just going to thread your yarn needle with that long tail. And then I'm just going to secure the corner by going through here going through each corner a couple of times just to make sure that that's well in place and tightly secured. And then I'm just going to begin using the mattress stitch. And so what I'm going to be doing is on the edge stitch over here on this side, you'll see these V's. And I'm going to be going in through the upper or this outer edge of the V. And then on the corresponding other side, you can see we have these V's here. I'm just going to be going into the center of that V and coming through the other side. And you may be hearing my Chihuahua snoring in the background. That's what that noise is. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the next stitch, my next V here, and I'm going to go in through the center of it, and then I'm going to find the next V on this side, which is this one here, and I'm going to go in there, pull that yarn through. We'll tighten this up as we go along. So then I'm going to go into the next one. So we're just in this one. I'm going to go into this one here, just under that outside thread. And then on the other side, I look for the next V, which is right here. I'm going to go in to there. So you're just going to do that back and forth all the way down to the bottom, and then just secure the corner again. And then I'll meet you back when that's all completed. And I just want to show you, after a while, you'll see the threads just kind of line up right next to each other, and you don't even really have to turn the work to the side. You can see how they line up right next to each other, and you'll just go in one side and then through the other side. And just do that back and forth. As you're going along, you can see if you've got the right tension on your sewing, and if you need to, you can just kind of pull it snug along the way as you're going. But of course, don't pull it too tight because you don't want it to get bunched up. And I'm here at the corner. I'm at the last stitch here. And I will just go through that, go around that a couple of times. just pull that snug and I will sew in these two ends. To sew in the ends, just sew it into these back ridges on the inside of the work. And then just cut your yarn. Now you can see our seam here on the inside of the work, and when we turn the work inside out, you can't see the seam. This is where my seam is, and it becomes invisible. So now you are ready to enjoy your wavy knit Tunisian cowl. You can see that now that we've sewn it up, most of the curling has come out of it. If you want to, you can block it further with some warm water and let it dry. Or you can just wear it as is. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe for our weekly free videos, yarn reviews, giveaways, and much more. All the links to that are in the description below, as well as other links to the blog post where you can get the written pattern, where you can get the chart that I was using. And please share this and share your photos. I'll have links where you can share your photos in the description below. Thanks for joining, and hope to see you in the Crochet Magical Mystery Tour with your finished projects. Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.